Welcome to episode 1 of the Going for Broke Outdoors podcast, a podcast by an outdoorsman for other outdoorsmen. I'm your host, Jeremy Gillespie. In today's episode, we catch up with Ryan Anderson. I met Ryan through the Hunting Beast forum, where he goes by the screen name Lockdown. Ryan is a humble but highly accomplished hunter from Minnesota with a wealth of experience gained from a lifetime as an all-around outdoorsman. Ryan has over 20 bucks to his name, including a 162-inch beast of a deer that he nicknamed the Hulk. Ryan bagged the Hulk in 2016 after 3 years of history and a 2-year chase. Last year, Ryan also arrowed his target buck on the opening day of Minnesota's archery season after patterning the deer through long-distance preseason observation. In this podcast, we're going to learn more about Ryan and his tactics. Today's podcast is brought to you by Stealth Outdoors, the tree stand silencing store. Stealth Outdoors manufactures a variety of tree stand silencing equipment aimed at the mobile hunter, including climbing stick wraps, cam buckle covers, platform cable wraps, and more. I've used stealth strips on my climbing sticks and tree stands since 2014, and I can personally attest to the durability and functionality of the product. On top of that, Stealth Outdoors provides world-class customer service and ships products quickly. Visit www.stealthoutdoors.com for more information. Today's podcast is also brought to you by Ideal Northern Edge food plot mixes. Ideal Northern Edge has carefully created a variety of seed mixes and minerals to cover all of your food plot planting needs. A bright color coating on the seeds provides visual contrast against tilled soil and ensures optimum seed coverage and density for your next food plot planting. Visit www.idealnorthernedge.com for more information. All right, I'm here with Ryan Anderson. Been trying to put this podcast together for a few weeks now. Ryan is harder to track down than a Boone and Crockett buck, but finally wrangled him here, got him on the line, and excited to talk to him. How's it going, Ryan?
It's going good. I'm finally make this work here. Couple young kids at home. Times get pretty strained.
Wild times in the world right now.
I know
with COVID and all that too.
I know it.
So we'll go ahead and dive into it here. The first question, give us a little bit of an intro about yourself, how you first got into hunting, how long you've been hunting, etc., for the people that aren't familiar with you from the Hunting Beast forum.
Okay, well, as mentioned, my name's Ryan Anderson. I'm 37. I was born and raised in western Minnesota. It's hardcore row crop country where I live. It's really flat. I do drive to some rolling hills and some better habitat hunting now, but growing up, our deer hunting was pretty poor. Our waterfowl hunting was not, though. We had some phenomenal waterfowl hunting in the 90s. And I've shot bow and guns ever since I can remember. I mean, I remember getting pretty much what everybody shot when they were a kid, that red bear compound, that youth compound that has been out forever and ever. And my dad would take me with duck hunting and sat me on a limb below him one time on a bow hunt. And we had this little buck come in, like, it was super lucky. He came like 300 yards across the plowed field right to us. And I heard him draw back and he smoked him and took off. And I was like, that was the coolest thing ever. You know, I'm sitting there probably with a rope tied around my waist, right? Sitting on a limb. Things were a little different back then. But I shot my first duck when I was 7 and hunting and fishing. It's been a huge part of my life ever since I can remember. I don't know what I'd do without it. It's my escape from the world, I guess you could say. I don't have time to do everything anymore. So I pretty much just concentrate on deer and mixed in a little fishing. That's a little easier to do now for me with my girls are 3 and 5, and they seem to be taking to it really well, catching some bass and walleyes and sunfish this summer. And it's easier for me to do that than to go off scouting by myself and then leave my wife at home with the kids. So I'm kind of in a paused state as far as acquiring a bunch of new properties to hunt and stuff like that. But I got enough hunting and scouting in early on in my beast career that I got a pretty decent inventory of spots. So
going to the waterfowling, I'm not a big duck hunter. Haven't done much waterfowling. Was there any lessons that you learned from waterfowling that transferred over to your deer hunting?
I would say the biggest thing is that not all hunts are going to pan out. How many times would you, it's the same with fishing, or it doesn't matter what you're hunting. You're going to have great days and you're going to have bad days. You're going to have days that you think are going to be phenomenal, and then it ends up they suck. Like we'd have a slew full of ducks one day and then go back the next day thinking we were going to melt the gun barrel again, and then we'd only get a couple. So that kind of helped me learn early on that it's not all fast paced all the time. And especially with bow hunting, I started bow hunting when I was 12, and there was a lot less deer around then than there is now, and I'd have a lot of hunts where I didn't see nothing. So it's like I kind of got conditioned to that from the get-go, which I'm glad it happened that way rather than the other way around. The biggest thing about the waterfowling was, and you learn about the times of the year too. Certain times are really good, certain times aren't as good. Like early season around here is really not much around typically until you get the northern birds down. And then as soon as it gets cold, everybody else bails and they want to start thinking about ice fishing and stuff like that. That was some of the best hunts we had. Late season goose hunts too. I've hammered geese in the snow before. You kind of learn that if you put the effort in, there's always some hunting to be had somewhere if you try hard enough.
Yeah, I bet we'll get into that later, but timing is a big thing for deer hunting that I've learned, over the years, and I'm sure that'll come up in the conversation later. But that, and it sounds like perseverance, good lessons learned. Definitely with bow hunting, perseverance plays a big part in keeping a positive attitude. So jumping over to deer hunting, I'm interested. When do your preparations for the deer season start?
I would say in my early days, I wouldn't really start thinking about it too much until midsummer when it's super hot and buggy, which I'm so glad I don't do it that way anymore. I'd trim all my stands when it's hot out and just miserable. But anymore, it's year round. Especially if I tag out early, I'll still try and get out scouting. And if you can locate a buck that makes it through the season, I mean that's huge. Then you're at a head start right off the bat. So I'll it gets, like I say, I got kids now too. So if I punch tags, the wife gets all happy and wants me to stay home. Where I'm just like, oh man, I got all this free time. I could get a ton of scouting in, and it doesn't really work that way for me anymore. But it's fine. I wouldn't have it any other way for the moment. As far as the scouting, I would say my slow times of the year are like February. If there's deep snow, like around here, the deer yard up and 95% of the ground is going to be a ghost town. And none of the bedding is the same. Like everything's extremely different. So it's really not a great time for me to scout. And I would say my other slow time is like June, like right around now. I'm going to start in another couple of weeks. I'll probably start observing again. I like to wait until you can actually see what they're going to be. It's almost torture if you can see a big old buck with pop cans coming off his head and you got to wait another month to see what it's even going to be. So I just fish and fill up my time that way. I'm big on the last couple of years. I'm really big on observing late summer. Like last year, I observed the buck that I shot 3 different times. I struggled to get him on a pattern a lot of times, but he was on a pattern. I seen him. I scouted it 3 times and did the same thing each time, and then I moved in and hid behind a bush and killed him.
That was a opening day buck, right? Or opening weekend?
That was opening day. Yeah, he wasn't a great big one. I mean, I'm not trying to act like I've got a boatload of mature bucks under my belt, but I feel like I've done pretty well for my area. And he was, I don't know, some people would call him 3. I'm not sure how old he is for sure, but I'm kind of thinking just stud 2-year-old. But I observed him from a distance, and I'm like, I just have to see what he looks like up close. When him and the other 2 bucks popped out, I heard them come sloshing from the bedding. And when they popped out, my heart started pounding, and the rest is history.
I'll say it's not always about the rack; it's about the hunt too. And when you get excited, man, it's hard not to pull the trigger.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it had so many things going for it too. I mean, I hadn't killed a buck on public in Minnesota for a few years, and I'd never got one on opening day. I'd never patterned one like that. Plus it was from the ground, and it just everything all rolled together. I just had to shoot him.
Yep, pretty exciting. So let's switch gears a little bit. And speaking of gear, do you use any sort of gear checklist like preseason to get your gear ready? And if so, what's on it?
I'm really not much of a gearhead at all. I like to trust the stuff that I have, but I am not one of these guys that looks through the magazines and stuff to try and see the latest, greatest products. My camo's old. The camo jacket that I wear, I've been wearing since I was like 14, and I got it as a hand-me-down from my cousin. And I was drowning in it back then, and it's like all tattered up. But like at this point, I've done a lot of killing in it, and it's like the last thing I want to do is get rid of it. It's old school mossy oak, like jean jacket. And no, I don't have anything as far as like, I bring my binos, my rangefinder. I've got a few different bow hangers and stuff, depending what my setup is. But I mean, other than that, I got my bow, my rangefinder, my release, my arrows, and I go hunting. I don't rely on equipment at all. It seems like nowadays that's what everybody just gravitates to. Like, what's the next best thing? What's going to give me an edge? In my mind, stop flipping through magazines and go walk some brush. Go find something. Go learn. You're going to be way more successful if you just get out there and scout and forget about all the gadgets. Have equipment that you can trust and just stick with it. My bow is a 07 Switchback XT. I bought it new in 07, and I'll probably have it for a few more years yet. I get pass-throughs with it. I mean, what else do you want? And what I like about it is I'm super familiar with it, right? It's like I know that bow really well. You shoot something for, 13 years? It's like it gets really automatic, there's no adjusting at all. So
my next question, what's on your must-have equipment list? And one of the things I didn't hear you mention, but I bet it's on your list and I want to talk about it a little bit. Coming from Michigan and now moving out to Montana, I'm doing a lot more glassing, and I think the country where you're at's a little more open. Are you using your, in late summer, your binos and your spotting scope a lot? And can you shine in Minnesota? And if so, how critical is the glass and the observation, do you think, to your success in the season?
glass is actually one of the things, as long as we're talking gear and stuff, glass is one of the things that I will spend money on. I actually got crazy lucky and I found a Leopold gold ring spotter in a cardboard box full of hunting stuff. And I bought the entire box of stuff for $80. I use my spotter all the time, even when I'm shining. We can shine in Minnesota for 2 hours. For 2 hours after sundown. I do that a lot, and it's oftentimes where they're right at the end of your light beam, and I always got my spotter right on the window right there. Without that, I would miss out on a lot of, certainly the details of, was it an 8-pointer or a 10, or was it a G4 on his right side or left side type stuff. I use it a lot for my observations in the field too. If I'm on the ground, I got a tripod, and sometimes I'm up a tree, and I used to film, so I still have a camera arm, and I put my spotting scope on that camera arm, and that is the ticket for that. So if you've got one and you need to do some long distance observing in a tree, camera arm and fluid head and your spotter works awesome.
Oh yeah, that's a good tip there. And you're kind of in a low density area, deer density, from what I understand, and to me that's real important to be able to look at a buck that is and decide with the spotter, like you said, pick up some of those fine details. Maybe that's something you want to go after, maybe that's something you don't want to go after, and that's a critical piece of gear in my opinion. Like I said, especially out west, I've been using my glass a lot more.
Absolutely. I've hunted South Dakota quite a bit too, and if I didn't have a spotting scope, that thing saves you miles. I mean, mine goes to 40 power, and every time I head out there, I wish I had 60 power or 80 power, because there's always one way the heck out there where it's like, man, is that a shooter or not? Do I feel like walking 1.5 miles? Yeah, it's crucial. And if anybody out there is thinking about getting one that doesn't have one, buy once, cry once. Buy something that's decent. Those low end spotting scopes are just garbage. So it's something that'll last your whole life more than likely.
I agree 100%, and I advocate the same thing to all my friends. I tell them, hey, if that's all you can afford, great. That's better than nothing, but it's almost not. I'd actually rather have a good pair of binos than a bad spotting scope. When you get to the mid-tier stuff, though, that's where it really starts making a difference. And anything mid-tier or higher, then it's definitely an upgrade. So one last gear question here, and then we'll get off the gear and get into some tactics. But this is kind of a hot topic right now. And two things. One, what kind of broadheads are you shooting, fixed or mechanical, and what type specifically? And two, everyone seems to be talking about high FOC arrows. So what kind of arrow setup are you shooting, and has that changed recently with all the FOC talk?
Again, I'm not a big gear guy. I've shot 3-blade fixed my entire life. They varied from thunderheads to wasps, and I think there was another brand thrown in there. But for the last, 10 years or so, I've shot 3-blade muzzies, the originals, and not the MX3s. And the reason for that is because of the blade cutting angle. That is the one thing I see people, it's the great debate, Chevy, Ford, mechanical or fixed. It's like we all almost get tired of reading all the questions and this and that, but it's like, to each their own. It doesn't matter to me what people are shooting, but the one big complaint I have with these, especially those 2-blade mechanicals, is the super steep cutting angle. If you look at the difference of that angle versus like a 3-blade original Muzzy, I mean, their angle is probably, if 90 degrees is straight up, they're at like, what, 70 degrees? Something like that. That's pushing through the meat. You know what I mean? Or if you hit bone, that's trying to push, but it's not slicing. So that's the big, and people say, oh, they don't penetrate. Oh, it's because of the deployment that absorbs the energy. No, not really. It's because it's trying to push blades through meat rather than slice through meat. So that's the main reason I don't shoot mechanicals. So yeah, like I say, the Muzzy 3 blades, I have no reason to change. I've hit shoulders, spines, this and that, and I've bent the ferrule, but I've never had any sort of catastrophic failure at all. A rippled blade, but I mean, that's expected. They advertise bad to the bone, and I can attest to that. And I don't know, I don't see a reason to change, to be honest. So I stick with them. My arrows, I picked up some Victory arrows, super cheap ones. I want to say I paid like $5 or $6 an arrow for them or something. Price was right, so I bought them. I was doing a little bit of long distance shooting through my neighbor's. He's got a swing hanging from his tree. It's like a pendulum swing, and just to mix things up, it was kind of like swinging like a pendulum spinning. So I was timing it, shooting my arrow through the ropes while I screwed up, hit a rope, and it ended up hitting the concrete on the back of my garage. And obviously it lost a lot of speed, but it held up extremely well. I mean, I don't see a reason to change. But I'm not fussy on brand. I think the technology and the gear that we've got now is far surpassed what we had decades ago, and nobody complained then. If you can hit what you're aiming at, as long as, maybe it would be good research. If you got an arrow you don't know if you like, shoot something hard with it. Shoot it through, sacrifice a couple. Shoot a rock or shoot, as long as you're doing it safely, and see what happens. If your arrow explodes, all right, maybe try something else. It's going back to brands don't kill deer. Brands of arrows, brands of bows, brands of broadheads. If you put your arrow where you want to put it, the deer's going to die. The front of center, I really haven't put any attention into that. I shoot 100 grains, which is going to be low front of center. And the only time and I got a slow bow too. And I only shoot 53 pounds in short draw length. So mine is extremely slow by today's standards. And the only time I don't get a pass through is if I hit heavy bone, shoulder, spine. I should probably pay a little more attention to that. And I know I'm not going to go with a light arrow because when I shoot rifle, I go with a heavier bullet. My dad's a big fan of that too, going heavy. And you just get more penetration, An object in motion tends to stay in motion. So heavy makes sense to me. But I don't really get into that. And I don't know what my arrow weighs or anything like that.
Well, a sharp to well-placed arrow almost always does the job.
There you go.
Sounds like on the gear front, you're pretty straightforward, but I know you have some unique tactics, and we're going to get into that here. The first question, when we get into tactics, what actions are you taking in the off season to increase your odds? And I know we talked about glassing a little bit, but talk about maybe your process from, let's say, when the season closes in January up until the season opener, which that varies for you guys, right? Mid-September usually.
Yeah, I think it's the third weekend in September, which can be anywhere from like, say, the 14th-ish to like 20th, 22nd. But it's right around mid-September, right in there every year.
So what are you doing? Like, start us in January, and I know you said February is a slow month, but January, and kind of walk month to month, what you're doing in each month, and like a high-level summary.
Okay. Typically in January, if I've got, especially if there's no snow, that's kind of the big factor on whether or not the deer are yarded up or not. If we don't have a lot of snow, and if I can I'll still consider like January until like first, second, maybe even third week of January. If we don't have much snow, I feel like that'll still translate into December. I'm certainly paying attention to where some big bucks are at, what properties are holding deer. That's a kind of a big one in itself, what has deer and what doesn't, because there's certain properties that as soon as there's a snowflake, the deer are just gone. If the snow is heavy, I basically am forced to just forget about it. Sometimes that means a couple months of really not much whitetail related. But as soon as the snow melts, I have to jump on it as fast as I can, get into spring scouting. I have enough spots now where I think I benefit from knowing them more intimately. I've talked on the forum a lot about, I spread myself too thin in my early days. So if you don't know what to expect, how are you going to know exactly what you're looking at? If you've got and you can't tell all of this from the spring per se, but just knowing the property itself and just getting a feel for it and knowing it more intimately will help your gut reactions when you do see a sign, right? So lately I've been really concentrating on a few properties versus a lot of properties. So but I do have to do a lot of prep work in the spring. It's another debatable topic, trimming, but it's basically impossible to hunt where I live in Minnesota with all the buckthorn, and it's extremely fertile ground and very thick. So I do have to do a little bit of nipping for my sets, and I try and do that in the spring. And the last 2 seasons, last year I got basically no scouting in at all. I was just too busy with kids and work. This year I did a little bit better, and I forget if I got 8 or 9 sets ready, and then a little bit of new ground checked out, and then I forget when the last time I was in the woods, right about the time when the ticks came out, and I haven't been out since. But so now I've been fishing again, and then, like I say, in another couple of weeks here, end of July especially, mid to the end of July, anything big is going to have a pretty sizable rack, and they should be hitting the beans pretty hard. So yeah, my tactic is I don't do a lot of bedding area scouting that time of year, just because it's so thick and it's so hot and the mosquitoes are just insane. Because if I'm moving, then I get ate up. If I can sit in one spot and I got my thermocell and some mosquito spray, it's bearable. So that's kind of what I gravitate towards. So I try to get all my boots on the ground stuff done in the spring if possible, and then mostly just observe, shine, few weeks or a few nights a week right before season. I'll drive around right at dark if that's all I have time to do, and then shine afterwards. But I'm definitely not one of these guys that shoots his bow all year. I don't know. I've had seasons in the past where I've probably shot less than 100 arrows before season, but that's probably the opposite of most of you guys. But I'm not shooting 50 yards either, so it goes hand in hand. But yeah, as far as my my routine or whatever, that's pretty much it. I'm really big, like I said before, on the summer observations right before season. Those last couple of weeks, that's just free intel. There's a really good chance that those deer will still be there. Now I know there's higher pressure states like Michigan and stuff like that, but it's the one thing that I've got going for me is extremely low pressure, because my part of Minnesota is not like, I don't see non-resident plates here during deer season, during gun season, and I'll probably share public pieces with a couple people a year, and that's it while I'm bow hunting. So if I can find a shooter, which is a challenge, if I can find a shooter, I have a pretty good chance of getting on him. I just got to find one that's on a pattern.
So one of the things that I know you do, but I didn't hear you mention there, is cyber scouting. So I'd like to hear your take on cyber scouting, specifically what you're looking for on the maps and how you're correlating that to boots on the ground. And that's the other thing I'm interested in, your boots on the ground scouting. Once you've identified a piece, either something you've hunted before or a new piece from cyber scouting, when you get in there, what sign are you looking for, and what kind of sign gets you excited?
Yeah, I'm really big on cyber scouting. I rely on it a lot. As I mentioned before, time's an issue. So the one thing I can do is get on the computer or on Onyx on my phone after the kids are in bed, and then see what I can learn. I'm really big on going over things. Say I got a new piece of ground, I'll cyber scout it. I'm looking for the best of the best. Like, I don't have time to check out 20 or 30 properties. I want to check out 50 properties online, and I'll probably visit 4 or 5 in person.
Let me stop you right there. So when you're looking at these properties online and you say best of the best, what specifically on a map makes you think this is going to be a place a big buck might hang out? What kind of features?
Anything swampy, big marshes, anything that looks like it really sucks to hunt. If it sucks, it's gonna probably have some big bucks in there. You gotta outwork the next guy or be smarter than him. Sometimes both. Another thing that I really look for when I'm cyber scouting is neighbor properties. I have capitalized on neighbors many times. One of my private groves that I hunt is like, I've measured it on Onyx before. It's tiny. It's like 4 acres or something stupid. It's less than 10 for sure. And most of that's grass. And I killed a pretty nice buck out of it one year. because it's sandwiched in between a bunch of prime properties. And when the crops are standing, I'd hunted enough. That was back when I did repeated sits a lot. But once rut kind of came around, if there was some standing corn there, you were in the game. So if you're looking for neighboring properties that are prime, if you see stuff like manicured food plots, cut trails, through the brush and this and that, lots of deer stands, people aren't going through all that work to shoot forks and spikes. Not saying they don't shoot any, but just pay attention to what the neighbors are doing. And there's times, even if you're within a few miles, they roam in this farm country, they roam around a lot. I've known of multiple deer that have moved in the 4 to 5 mile range. But yeah, so something big or thick, or if it doesn't even have to be big, it can be really small, but if it's got the right bedding terrain, or like a nice island or a nice peninsula jutting into the cattails, because deer don't know boundaries. They don't know if it's a 20-acre piece of public or 2,000. They just know if they feel safe in that little 1 acre, 2 acre spot, right? But I'm big on cyber scouting. I like to find the best of the best, and that's just a guess. You new guys, you're going to have a lot of learning to do. The best thing to do is answer your questions. If you don't know if a property is decent, go check it out, and you just got to keep at it. And pretty soon you're going to be able to relate things, right? It's like, oh, that kind of reminds me of that other property, and that one kind of sucked. So you'll learn over time. But I like to find the best, go in, scout it, and then I like to rehash things. If I find something good, the first thing I'll do is go back online and look at it again and make sense of what I saw. And more often than not, you'll be able to make sense of a lot of things. You'll find trails that you didn't know were there. You'll find, bedding areas that you maybe didn't expect, stuff like that. So, but I've had times where, as far as boots on the ground scouting, I've had times where I've had to go back a third time before I could actually pick my kill tree. I just want to make sure I'm set up right. But as far as what I need to see, I've talked on the forum about it's kind of like a mental bedding calculator. It's like how many different things does this bedding area have going for it? Are there old and new rubs in there? If there's a lot of rubs, that's a +1. If there's different sizes, old, new, and you can tell that trees, like I often look at trees that are like thigh size, and if you look close enough, you can tell that it was probably rubbed when it was like a 2-inch tree. When you start finding stuff like that, and you can tell that bucks have been there every year from the beginning of time, so it seems. That's huge in my book. Stuff like bed size, if there's a bunch of really big warm beds, that's another thing to add, another +1. If it seems like it's an area that would hold deer all year, that's huge in my book, because say it's close enough to food that it might get used early season, but it's also secure enough that when pressure ramps up, there could still be the deer there. That's big too. Say there's a bunch of scrapes nearby. That certainly ain't gonna hurt nothing. Big poop, and a big thing that I really, really focus on is escape. Like if you imagine if you're a deer, Dan has talked about this a lot. If you imagine you're a deer and you need to escape danger, whether it's a pack of coyotes or a deer drive or whatever, how easy is it to get away? And that's like one thing that I realized in my early days, where I'd find buck beds. Like I'd get so excited. Me and my buddy Tyler would find a bed and there'd be a rub in it. Like, oh yeah, buck bed. This is awesome. Like, how are we going to hunt this? And then it became apparent real soon that the ones that didn't have good escape and they were just kind of there and just like, along a slough edge, and there's a little patch of brush and there's a buck bed in the back. Well, that's really not a classic spot, and it's really nothing great. It's like, why are they there? But when you can look at it and say, how am I even going to get in here and hunt him? That's the stuff that seems golden to me. And the funny part about that is I've had I don't know, 4 or 5 of those type of spots and have yet to catch a big one coming out of any of them. But it's obvious to the sign, or because of the sign, that they're there at some point. I just haven't had the stars align on those certain bedding areas yet. But it should get you excited. And it's one of those things when you're new, it's hard to tell. Like pretty much everything is going to get you excited. You're going to see a bedding area, and it's hard to differentiate on a scale of 1 to 10 if a bedding area is a 5 or an 8, right? You're going to know it's decent, but how decent is it? And it just takes time to figure that stuff out. But that's one crucial element is it has to excite you. You have to want to hunt it, and that helps confidence so much. And if you're not that excited about it, just keep an eye on it. Maybe throw a hunt at it if you're not sure. Try and answer some questions, and just keep going until you do find something that's really good. I mean, it's a grind. Like even now, like I'm really confident in my cyber scouting, and if I can find one really solid bedding area a year that gets me excited, like I really want to hunt it, that's probably about average. And that's after miles and miles of walking.
You said a few really important things there, and I was taking notes. I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but I want to circle back to a few things. And one of the things that I've found and that you mentioned that's been really important to me is when, especially early on, when you find a really good spot, boots on the ground, is to immediately go back and look at that spot online and look at it online from the perspective that you now know what it looked like boots on the ground, and kind of pick it apart and say, this is what it looked like on the map. Now I know this is what it looks like when I get in there, boots on the ground, and how do those relate? And I think the more a guy does that, the more he can go back and tweak your cyber scouting, and it gets a little better every time you do that. And before you know it, you're picking out the best spots from cyber scouting alone sometimes.
It's kind of a complex situation. It's we see a lot of people commenting, oh, this is his entrance trail, and this is his exit, and this is a parallel trail, and blah 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 blah. We've got all the names for it on the beast. But there's like you can't just walk in and have all the answers just right off the bat. I mean, I'll go in and I'll try to get like 70% of it and just get familiarized. Then I'll go back online. Then I'll just kind of like mix everything together, and then it'll oftentimes be like, okay, so that makes more sense. Like after you see it online, and then go back in again. I try to get it done in two trips in. But if I'm not sure, I just got to think on it more. And confidence is so huge to me. I mean, if I feel like I'm in the perfect tree, that just helps stay attentive on stand. And I don't know, that's just kind of how I do it. I want to know I'm in the best possible spot. And I mean, I don't just walk in and say, hey, yep, there's the tree right there. That's the one we want. I mean, I've literally spent an hour in a 50-yard area, hemming and hawing and going back and forth, trying to think about what's best and, what's going to happen with what wind and how that goes. So.
Yeah, exactly. One other thing I heard you mention, and I want to circle back. So this probably goes along with getting on the forum and starting to learn about hunting buck beds. I think there's a misconception, at least initially, that these beds you're going to find are going to be worn to the dirt. They're going to be dented in the ground. I think that's actually the exception rather than the rule. But I did hear you say finding a well-worn bed. So in your experience there in Minnesota, how often are you finding like really worn out beds as a percentage of the overall beds you find?
I don't find very many, and I don't find very many. I find very few big rubs. I don't find, yeah, like you say, people read this stuff on the forum and they think they're going to find something that's just worn down to the dirt and there's going to be poop all over and all these, 30 rubs in there. That's not how it is at all. The bedding that I shot my buck out of last year, I don't know if it's a couple acre area, and I don't know if there's 40 beds in there, just to guess. It's a definite concentration. It's a spot that I actually walked in a couple different years, and I thought it was doe bedding with the little buck sign in it, so I ignored it. But all that was in there was like 4 rubs, and the biggest one was the size of a broom handle. Or maybe there were 6, I forget. I'd have to look through my notes. But it's nothing that's going to be, oh man, this is the goods, this is it. It wasn't full of poop. It wasn't like, it's actually kind of frustrating, to be honest, because without that observation, I never would have hunted it. So it's like you don't find these perfect buck beds, worn to the dirt. It's way more complex than that, and that's what takes time, and that's why people get frustrated and quit, is because they think they're going to find these bedding areas that are just telltale and just super simple. And sometimes you do, but most often you don't. So it's like that's where use cameras, smartly, of course. If they're legal, I actually can't on a lot of public here, but observations and hot sign. If you stop back and periodically through the season and just say you got a bedding area that you're questioning and you think it's going to be good. If you scout the fringes of it 3 or 4 times and you don't find any big buck tracks, you're probably not going to want to hunt there. It's all legwork. But I'm kind of getting sidetracked. But as far as like finding the really worn beds, not very many. They're pretty few and far between for me.
So 2 more things here, and then we'll tie up this topic. One of the other things I heard you say was that you are doing well if you find one really good bedding area a year. And do you think that's like a consequence of the area you're hunting, or just there's that few of really quality spots to hunt when it comes to getting in like the best of the best stuff?
I think my biggest problem here is the fact that the hunting pressure is so low and there's so many crops. I know I've caught some flack on the forum for saying this in the past, and people think I'm nuts, but the pressure is so low that they're not forced to use the same beds over and over and over. They're not forced to go way back into a remote cattail island around opening weekend because nobody's out there. I'm in half of these public areas by myself, and it's like they can lay along any random slough. I've jumped decent bucks along slough edges that aren't classic, bedding locations. It's just they don't have to bed defensively because they're not that threatened, you know. So I think that's my biggest issue. When I went to Wisconsin last year with Tyler, it was pretty interesting how different it was. I'd never really scouted it was there was some farm ground, but it was kind of big woodsy feel to it. And the first day or two, we're like, where are all the beds? Like we're used to just seeing beds scattered all over the place. And we found fewer beds, but when we did find them, it was way more concentrated. And I ended up finding, we were only there for 3.5 days. And I ended up finding a couple really nice bedding areas. And one of them was just awesome. It was just torn up. Like I don't find stuff like that in Minnesota. It's just due to the pressure differences and the age structure differences. And that's just kind of how it is. They don't have to be, one thing that I've noticed about a lot of Michigan hunters, like I would never want to live there. I know you used to, but after talking to you and the guys that you've talked to, your friends there, it seems like it's a really hard place to put a big one down. But if you can find a secure bedding area, it's really high odds.
I would agree with that. What you said about Wisconsin, it sounds really similar to Michigan. There's fewer beds in general, but the ones that you find are very obvious when it's going to produce because there's a really concentrated amount of sign in there. They're just hard to find.
Right. See, and that's like I had a couple different areas where I was like thinking it was going to be some beds in there because like pretty much every single spot I pin, there will be beds there just because there's bedding all over here. It's really thick. The grass is tall. They feel secure in a lot of spots. So they're so spread out that there's beds everywhere. Where I checked a couple spots and I found like a couple like maybe beds that I think are beds, but it's like, what is going on? Like this is crazy. And the one spot that Tyler went into, it just looked insane. Tons of little islands, tons of structure, and like I didn't even like it because there were so many classic terrain features that it's like it's a needle in a haystack. Like which one is he in? So it's like I didn't even want to go there. And Tyler went out there and he walked a bunch of those islands, and there was a little skim of ice on the water, and there wasn't even a track, and like no ice broken. And he's like, it blew my mind. He's like, they're not here. He's like, I ain't coming back here tonight because there was nothing in there. I think but he did see a buck cross the road, a decent buck in the headlights that morning. So it's like they're there, but it's like it almost, it's one way or the other. It's like really loose bedding where you never know where they're going to be, or it's really tough because they're only in a couple spots and it takes some legwork to find them. So which one's worse,
Yeah, it's hard to pick there. So moving on here, we talked about cyber scouting, kind of what your off season looks like. I heard you mention Onyx too, so I started using Onyx a few years ago. I think it's super valuable, and sounds like that you're using that pretty regularly too. So if anybody's listening, tell tell them like what you think the advantages are, because I think a large majority of people, especially guys like us that are hunting public land regularly, are using that now. But if they're not, give them a reason why they should, because I'm definitely a fan.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things where we used to carry around plat books, and Dad and I would have different years, and they're constantly changing. Oh, this landowner changed. This got sold 5 years ago, and no, that's not accurate anymore. And I mean, for the most part, Onyx is all up to date. You got a interactive plat book. I mean, the stuff you can do with it, like measuring. I even use that quite a bit. There's times where I'll be cyber scouting, like, would this be a good spot for a gun stand? It looks like I could cover a lot of stuff, and I'll measure stuff. Oh, that's 212 yards. That's 142, and stuff like that. Yeah, it's one of those things that if you got a smartphone, you basically have to have it, in my opinion, just because you're going to be a little bit behind the eight ball if you don't. It's just a handy tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I use it all the time, especially out west. So that'll probably cover the off-season scouting. I want to get into some of your tactics now. You're pretty well known on the Hunting Beast forum for ground hunting. You had a real popular thread on there. So I want to talk about ground hunting now. And one of my first questions is, do you have any ground sets where there are huntable trees? And if so, what made you decide to pick a ground set?
Yeah, I have a lot of spots that I hunt on the ground where there's huntable trees. I think I've killed two different deer with my lone wolf at my feet, more or less at my feet. And one of the big reasons is if you get up in a tree, a lot of times you have thick canopy and it's harder to shoot. So if I've got I ain't gonna be carrying a pole saw when I'm out cruising public lands and stuff like that. So it's like if I got a decent spot on the ground, as long as you can just maneuver to find a lane somewhere, often or sometimes I'll take a little string too, or a bungee cord or something, and tie branches back. But it's a lot easier to pull off a same day set in my area anyway. That's another thing that was very different in Wisconsin. I was like, man, this is glorious. I can hang my lone wolf and actually hunt without, and I can shoot. Like, this is awesome. It just doesn't happen around here. So that's one reason that I hunt the ground a lot, is because it's easier to pull off trimming wise. But yeah, I shot I think it was my 2015 buck. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I carried my stand in to hang in a pre-selected tree, and then I decided I liked this spot like 10 yards over a little bit better because I could cover one trail a little bit better, and I ended up shooting a buck that night.
Yeah, so it sounds like one of the big advantages to you is being adaptable then too, and the other one is you don't always have the opportunity to trim or to shoot where you want to.
Right. It's a little tougher. You're in their line of sight. That's the biggest part that's tricky with it. But it's not about the camo you've got. If as long as your colors are similar, I mean, you don't have to have leafy wear. You don't have to have a ghillie suit. If you can afford them, get them. I'm going to get a ghillie suit. I've actually never had one. I've killed a few with leafy wear on, but or my work Carhartt bibs and cattails. I did that one year in South Dakota in January. Tan Carhartt jacket and bibs, and just hitting the cattails. And I don't know. If you're on the fence about hunting on the ground, you have to forget about all the reasons why it won't work and concentrate on the few that make you feel like it will. And it's a lot about confidence, because if you sit there and think, oh, this is going to be impossible, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Well, you might as well just go sit in a tree with some branches in your face then, because you're not going to kill anything. You gotta plan it out and just make it happen. And the more you do it, the better you'll get at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the listeners that might be apprehensive about ground hunting, if you can boil it down, give me your top three tips for a successful ground hunt.
The biggest one I think is breaking up your outline. If you set up and you're on a little bit of a hill and the deer's below you and he's got you skylined, that's going to be really tough. I'm not saying you can't do it, but you're really going to have to pay attention to when you move, because I mean people who hunt from trees know that you don't want to be skylined. You need some cover. So if you got dark camo on and a blue sky behind you, that's just a bad recipe. Another big one is being able to move quiet. One thing that I've done a lot of is pulling all the grass, or I carry a little hand pruner, and I'll cut all the grass, cut and pull, do whatever I can so I can move my feet 100% quiet. Because if you're on the ground and they hear a rustle, you might be playing statue for a few minutes. So you don't want any rustling. Be able to move your feet nice and quiet. Another big one is draw your bow, go through every scenario in your head. Make sure your arm's not hitting anything. I mean, I know all this stuff because I've made all of those mistakes. I've pulled back on a deer before and I used to keep my quiver on my bow and had my arrows touch something. And that was when I was probably 14 or something like that, 14, 15, and my arrow was touching something and I panicked and I shot and I muffed it. So it's like that. It's part of the reason that I'm good on the ground is because I've pretty much done it all. I've screwed up a lot of times, and just make sure you can move. I've had the back of my arm hit something that I wasn't expecting, and you want to talk about panic. You get that opportunity you've been waiting for all year and then be really uncomfortable when you shoot. It's another bad recipe.
I feel like there'll be a lot of heads out there nodding right now because I feel like that's the only way I learned deer lessons is the hard way.
Dude, or a branch catching my bow. Or another big one is make sure you can move your bow without your air. I got a whisker biscuit, partially because I'm on the ground and I'm moving around so much like that. But something that contains your arrow rest is really nice, or your arrow, not your rest. But because I've had like a stick get through the blades on my broadhead. Like, just make sure you can move. The last thing you want to be worried about is something stupid that happened and get you all in a panic because your heart's probably going to be beating a little bit anyways. So moving quiet is huge. Like I say, go through every scenario. If he comes down this trail, I'm going to wait till he gets behind that tree and shoot there, and then practice that when it's early. Now, every single thing you can think of, go through every scenario. And I kind of touched on that a little bit, but planning ahead. The biggest thing about planning ahead is your body positioning. When I had a couple times when I was younger, let's say a deer came in hard to my left and it was walking to front and center. Well, I would turn to my left and face it. Well, I shoot right-handed. I can't shoot straight in front of me if I'm facing left. So you got to sit, position to where you're going to be shooting, and watch with your head and your eyes. Look out the corner of your eyes, as little movement as possible. Position, that's where you got to plan out. If he comes from here, I'm going to shoot him here. If he comes from over there, I'm going to shoot him over by that tree, and have it all planned out. Position as soon as they show up, and hopefully they follow the script. You know how that goes. Sometimes they do their own thing. But be positioned for the shot from the second you see them.
Yeah, and that's a great tip that a lot of people that don't ground hunt might not realize, because in a tree stand on a platform where it's quiet, you're elevated, it's a lot easier to move around, and if you're not in the ideal position. But on the ground, like you said, eye level, line of sight, you have to keep that movement absolutely to a minimum. And there's nothing worse than seeing a deer that you want to shoot on your weak side and trying to have to move on the ground.
Right. See, and you mentioning weak side was good too, because like I say, I'm right-handed. So, okay, let's say my ground blind, my area I got cleared out is the clock, and the shot's going to happen at 12 o'clock, and I'm sitting in the center. I'm going to have my body facing like 3 o'clock. A deer might come in at 9 or 10, and you want to face, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, something like that. If you want to shoot to your left side, well, that's not natural. Like, it takes a little bit of willpower to almost do it, because it's in your mind to face, give all your attention to that deer and face him, but that is not what you want to do. Some blinds are easier to pull off than others. Some blinds you might be able to follow them like that, and there's a big wall of brush that they walk behind. You just give it a 90 degree rotation and you're good to go.
When you're sitting on the ground, are you using any sort of seat, or are you sitting right on the dirt?
That depends on the situation too. I do have a tripod chair. I carry that a lot. Just a cheap little thing I picked up for $12 somewhere. So I sit on that a lot, and then if I see one coming in, I ditch it and kneel. And if it's prime time, often I'll just ditch, like that last 20 minutes or half hour, that's when I see almost all my movement is right at dark. Then I'll just get ready and have my bow in my hand. Get a good ground bow holder. There's a couple different styles you can get, but they're fairly inexpensive. I've done some hiding in cattails, cornfields, stuff like that. Anywhere on the ground, you don't always have a spot to hang your bow, so a ground holder is pretty nice. And yeah, if anybody is interested in ground hunting, there's a lot of situations where if I didn't hunt on the ground, I'd be totally out of the game. The thread that Jeremy mentioned earlier is called Success from the Ground. And if you go on the Hunting Beast, that's on the all-time best tactical page under ground hunting, and there is a boatload of information in there. I got some diagrams in there from like some cornfield setups. Like I'll just describe that real quick. Like rather than make a circle where you're hiding, say you're 5 rows in, 4 or 5 rows in, and you get permission, don't go knocking a farmer's corn down without asking him. Get permission to do that. Rather than make a circle like that, you can have a little bit of a circle so you can move freely, but make it more of an X, right? Say I like to use 2 shooting lanes. So if one comes from my left, let him get past me and shoot him on my right side, and vice versa. If he comes from the right, get past me, I shoot him on my left side. So I got 2 lanes. And what you want to do is kind of make an X, if this makes sense. And you want to hide back in the corn farther to stay out of his vision when he enters the first lane. So you let him pass through that, and then I'll often take some stalks, thicken it up in the center, and then draw before he hits that second lane. And it's not uncommon when I'm on the ground that they'll get eyes on you right at the very end, but it's usually too late. Sometimes they win, it happens. Sometimes you got to stop them, and they got no clue. But that's kind of how I do that. And there's same thing as applies for cattails. Yeah, and that's all documented on the Hunting Beast too. There's just a wealth of knowledge on that website. They basically, Dan and the guys on there basically 180'd how I hunt. So
same here. Oh, a huge debt to those guys. One other quick thing on the ground hunting, and I think we'll wrap it up. But you mentioned drawing, and I think that's one of the big differences between hunting from the ground and hunting from a tree stand. So talk about what your process or maybe your timing is when you decide to draw on a deer from the ground. I'd like to hear your thoughts on when's the best time.
If they have their head down, even if they're in the middle of your lane and you're like, oh man, if I draw, they're going to see me. Draw really slow and practice it. It might keep your elbow tucked and make sure your draw weight is low enough that you don't have to reach towards the sky to pull it back, but just pull it back slow, whether it takes 10 seconds, 15 seconds. And oftentimes if they got their head down feeding, or if they're browsing on something, they're just going to snap and look at you. Well, if you can get to anchor, you'll be fine. Each situation is different as far as when I'll draw. Like I say, I'll try and plan it out. If there's certain bushes or trees that I can draw behind, I'll definitely take advantage of that. Once in a while, I'll have to draw really early, which I don't like doing at all. There's often times where I'll actually wait until they get in my lane and then just draw slow. That's what I did last year. And I've had that doe I shot in South Dakota in those cattails. She was at like 8 yards, and I was in a cattail blind with not a stick of any kind around for a long ways. I just hunkered down, and when she got when her head poked into my lane, I kind of had my bow like at a 45, and I just drew, and she seen me at the last minute, but it was too late. Sent one right through her heart, and that was that. So yeah, there's no one size fits all answer to that. It's just plan it out so it makes sense to you and just do it. And if it doesn't work, learn from your mistakes, figure out what you did wrong or how you could have improved and do that next time. It's as simple as that. You got to get out of your comfort zone. That's the one thing that I can't stress enough. And that's one reason I'm good on the ground is like I've had setups before that I'm like, there's no way this is going to work, but it's my only option. So I do it. And I've had those
Yeah.
work. And I've had those work and be like, oh my God, that was way easier than I thought it would be. And then it can happen the other way where like, oh, this should be this is a done deal. And he comes in and then he picks you out and then you feel like an idiot. So, you know,
Yeah, I'd advocate to anyone that doesn't ground hunt regularly, or people who have never ground hunted, definitely give it a try, because this is my personal experience. You're going to get into a situation where you wish you had that tool in your toolbox, and the more you practice, the earlier you practice, the more comfortable you're going to get with that. Like you said, get out of your comfort zone, but when you do that with enough practice, you're going to make that your comfort zone, and then you're going to be that much more proficient. It gives you a better chance if you find a good deer and he's in an area that you can only hunt on the ground. So I'm a big fan. Not saying I'm any good at it. I've killed a few off the ground, but it's and man, it's a lot of fun too. I didn't hear you mention that, but shooting one eye level, that's just a different experience, and it's a great time.
it's a rush. It's a rush, dude. And like Stanley said on the forum in that thread, he's like, once you kill a few on the ground, hunting from a tree is a cinch, and it is so easy. you know, it's you can get away with a lot more, and it just seems so much easier. And one other little trick I like to do for hunting on the ground or making a blind is I'm scouting a lot in the spring anyways. Well, I learned a long time ago that if you make that blind in the spring, say you drag some deadfalls or some big bushy branches, and you put cover where you want it, that summer growth will grow up through that. You can literally make a blind next to a single tree. Say you got a 2-foot trunk or something, be like, I want to hide behind this tree, but there's nothing here but this trunk. You got canary grass or whatever, haul some branches in, set it up how you want it to be set up, and then that grass will grow through there all summer, and nobody will even recognize it. It won't even look like a blind, until you sit in there and stomp the grass down in the center. But it's something that I've done quite a bit, and it's a pretty effective tactic, and it's pretty sneaky. Nobody ever sees them.
Yeah, so I'm assuming from that description that you're not setting up Lincoln Log Fort type ground blinds, right? Give me, we didn't cover that really. Give me a quick description of what your typical ground blind looks like, as far as how much you're moving around, or what you think you need for cover, and maybe less is more, I'm assuming, from your description.
You want to be hidden. You got to see him coming. That's another thing. You don't want to set up in really thick cover when he pops out at 25 yards when they're acting like a silent ghost, and then all of a sudden there they are. It's like you got to be able to prepare, right? But no, you don't need a ton of cover. But I like to pick out. Say there's a dogwood thicket, and then there's a different kind of tree, or there's one like 6-inch trunk of an ash tree or something that's in there. I'll be right behind that because you want to break your outline up. Don't try and blend into like the um, homogeneous stuff where everything looks exactly the same. Pick the something different. And then as far as what they look like, I do add a lot. I've even done that on hunt day. I did that last year on opening day where I just hid behind a bush, and then I had to nip a couple branches here and there, and I just stuck them in the ground to add cover, and then pull some grass that I pull out from where I want to stand, shove that in there too. You really can like make one out of nothing, especially in the spring. Just take a bunch of sticks, you can shove them in the ground. I do that a lot too, and it looks like a little 2 or 3 foot tree, or an extension of the little dogwood thicket. Nobody will ever know. But it's that's kind of what I do there. You kind of got to improvise, think outside the box. If there's something wrong with it, figure it out. It's not rocket science. Just figure something out, give it a try, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, try something else.
Great tips there. All right, so switching gears again, I know you've been on a few out-of-state hunts. What kind of preparations do you make for an out-of-state hunt to help your chances of being successful?
To use the example from Wisconsin last year, I spent a ton of time on Onyx. Like, I don't even want to know, to be honest, 30 hours cyber scouting. Just check in. I mean, there's a wealth of knowledge online. You can check up draw statistics and trophy zones and where all the big bucks have come from. Call some taxidermists. I've done that. I mean, you can learn a lot. I mean, talking to people call the game wardens. I actually just talked to one a couple of weeks ago about South Dakota for an area that I've been hunting forever. I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to let my secret out, but talking to people, if you get a hold of the right person, you would be amazed what they would tell you. Even hotel owners sometimes. Oh, I got a brother-in-law. He's got land down there. They shoot huge bucks every year. Oh, they do, huh? Thanks. I've had the same thing happen around Minnesota. A guy, I was knocking on a door for permission and he turned me down, but he wanted to talk. So I just talked to him, and like 20 minutes in, he's like, well, some guys from such and such a town, they hunt that public over there and they've shot 10 pointers out of there. Oh, really? Like, and he holds his hands out like nice and big. So talk to people, call around. I mean, you can do more than just sit behind the screen, right? Pick up your phone and dial a few people. And there's guys on the beast going hunting forums, and hey, there's some people get a little annoyed, if people are looking for a handout or whatever. But if you're genuine about it, say, hey, I'm not looking for anybody's hot spots, but what can you tell me about this? If you find somebody who's nice, you'd be amazed what they might tell you. So
Yeah, and my experience with that has been, what you said about talking to locals, game wardens especially. I've had good luck there, and on the forums and stuff. I think you generally have a much better reception if you PM somebody. Again, they're not going to give you their hotspot, but they might give you a general area of a state or tell you what to expect, or hey, maybe steer away from there. Sometimes you got to take that information with a grain of salt, of course, but you can definitely gain valuable information by talking to people, and especially like you said, farmers, game wardens, people who aren't, for lack of a better word, competition. And a lot of times you get real good information from them. So I'm on board with you there.
When you mentioned farmers, that's one. It seems like there's a few outlaws that are starting to ruin it for the rest of us. If you do talk to a guy who's a little angry, just brush it off. Don't give up. Talk to the next guy, because last time me and Tyler were out in South Dakota, we had a guy who used to give us permission to hunt his land, or at least cross it. And I basically got my butt chewed for no reason, and he was sick of people. Well, then next thing you know, Tyler hit a real nice mule deer and he went onto the neighbor's land, but he was super nice. We ended up buying him a gift certificate for the local bar and grill before we left and told him thanks. So it's like, you just gotta, it's, just like anything else, whether it's spring scouting or hunting in general, you have to be persistent, and the amount of effort you put into it, you'll be rewarded if you keep at it.
Yeah, the gift certificate's a great point too, and not that it necessarily has to be a gift certificate or anything, but a little genuine gratitude goes a long way, I think. And I always try to think when I'm out of state hunting, one, you're out of state, so maybe you're not the most popular person there to begin with, and two, you're a representative for all the people that are going to come behind you, right? So you want to make a good impression, and I always try to hunt ethically and stuff. But if you think about it from that mindset, hey, maybe there's going to be another guy behind me, you or some other guy from the beast. Set a good example. I think that's real important. I think overall the hunting community does a really good job of that. Like you said, there's a few outlaws out there and people that aren't doing the masses any favor.
I always try and approach it like a friendship. I mean, I've got landowners around here that I went. The one unfortunately passed away now, but I went fishing with him. Started out that I hunted his little grove. And next thing you know, he's calling me, "What'd you see tonight?" And next thing you know, we're friends. And I helped him with a little electrical project, and then we're fishing. And there's guys out there that we've known for years, and even if we're, you want to keep a good rapport with them, even if you don't plan on hunting their land. Take a half an hour out of your day and stop and say hi. If they're friendly. When you think about it, from the hunter's perspective versus landowner, it's like we get full access to their land, and what do they get? Nothing. It's like you can take a little bit of time out of your day to help them out. I had a turkey hunting a couple springs ago. I helped an old lady carry her garbage out from her basement, and just do something to show your appreciation. A little bit of effort goes a long ways.
Yeah, for sure. And another on kind of a tangent to this a little bit. A lot of times, like you said, if you get to talking to somebody, even if they tell you no and you keep talking to them afterwards, a lot of times they might say, well, I got a friend or a cousin or a brother or somebody from church, and they might let you on. Here's their name. And I always call it stranger danger. So the hardest thing to do when you're trying to get hunting permission is get over the stranger danger. But if you go over to the cousin or brother church member's house and say, Joe from down the road sent me over here and said maybe you got room for a hunter, then I think that just up your odds, tremendously.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's all about getting your foot in the door, and as long as you're a decent human and respectable, that's half the battle right there. Yeah, I had the one landowner that I told you I went fishing with. That started out with me hunting that tiny little 4 acre grove or whatever it was. And then we ended up being friends. He wanted to talk, what'd you see tonight? So we'd end up talking, and he'd give me a little nip of brandy is what he'd call it here and there. And then next thing you know, he's like, hey, why don't you just come and hunt my home place? And I was like, really? And that's been one of my best spots ever since. And now that he's passed away, I've got to know his wife, while he was alive, and she said, "No, you're more than welcome to still hunt here." And you just you can't expect to get hunting permission and give them nothing in return. It's a little silly to think that they're going to be super happy with that. Just do something to give back.
Yeah, agree with that 100%. So we talked about access a little bit and got off a little tangent there. We were talking about out of state hunting and the kind of preparations you make. But going back to the ground hunting type of question, give me a list of like the top three things you'd tell someone going on their first out of state trip. And I think there's like ground hunting, there's a lot of anxiety or a lot of uncertainty about your first out of state hunting trip, and it's never going to be comfortable. I always tell people just do it. But you've hunted what, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Minnesota, maybe another state or two. Let me know if you have. And what do you think what's the top three things?
Yeah, I've hunted South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin is all I've been to. But yeah, you just have to go out there and do it. You can try and plan it to death, and chances are you're going to end up changing your plan anyway. I would say the first thing you need to realize is that a lot of the ground you look at is going to suck. Or like when we first went out to South Dakota, I mean, especially out there, it's all like open and rolling hills and a few ravines and, here and there. Well, a lot of that stuff had cattle in it, so it would be walk-in land while it's grazed down to a quarter inch. That's just like nothing. Well, then it didn't take us long to realize, oh, hey, well, the waterfowl production areas, those are federal and they're not grazing those. Totally different. There's all kinds of browse. We were finding deer. But yeah, you'll find some of the stuff that looks great on the map ends up being pretty poor. Some of the stuff that you don't know if it's going to be good at all ends up being real good. But a lot of it, it's kind of like the law of averages. It can't all be great deer hunting land, right? You just got to keep a positive attitude and just keep going until you find something that's worth hunting. That's the first thing I'd keep in mind, is that most of the land is not going to pan out, and that's okay. The second thing I would say, I kind of touched on that too, is just don't overthink it. You can't plan it to death. It's good to put effort into it and try and learn what you can, but at the same time, if you try and plan every single step of the way, it's just not going to work out. Just kind of goes back to like a hot sign thing. Like if we're talking about scouting bedding areas, you want to find the hot sign. Well, plan your trip, pick your location, make those decisions wisely, and then from there, just don't overthink it. Go find yourself a buck to shoot. And I would say, lastly, just have fun. You're not at work. You don't have a bunch of responsibilities. All you got to do is hunt. What could be better than that? Even if it's not going that well, okay, well, now we know not to come back here. I guess that's a win, No use getting all mad about it because it's not going to make the situation better. So just try and have fun regardless of how the hunt is going.
I agree with all those, and I would just want to circle back to some of the things you said that kind of mirror my own experience. So coming from Michigan, Michigan's a dairy state. I think Minnesota's primarily a dairy state, but do you guys have range cattle there?
Most of the cattle, we don't have a lot of cattle on pasture. It's a lot of feedlots, and then our dairies are they're all inside in free stalls.
Same. So for Michigan, so the first time I hunted Kansas, it was a real eye opener to see all the pasture cattle, and like you said, that's a whole nother dynamic. So that's kind of fun, and it's different to get used to. It's got its own set of challenges. Like you said, you might find an area that looks primo on the map, and then you get there and it's absolutely full of cattle. So
Right. Oh, yeah. Anybody that hunts South Dakota and they've never been there and they're not used to dealing with that. But you'll also find that you can find deer with the cattle. we've had many times where we got a deer on the cart and you're pulling them past cows. So yeah, that's part of the learning curve, that's for sure.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the second thing I wanted to talk about that you mentioned was to keep moving, and that's something that I've found to be true. Definitely, if you're hunting public land out of state, especially if you don't know the area well, like your first time in there, even your second time in there, don't have a plan A, a B, and C. I mean, you need to have like 5 plans, and I'll talk a little bit about a hunt I did in Kansas in 2018. So my buddy Joel J Moss on the Beast and we actually took a trip to Kansas in the spring in March and did scouting for a full 3-day weekend. I mean, like walked ourselves to death, had all these good spots marked up. Well, for reasons I don't want to get into to give away the spot, we couldn't hunt any of those. So when we went there in the fall, it was starting all over plan A, plan B, plan C. So A was out the window, but we had a bunch of other kind of backup pieces that we cyber scouted. And dude, the first 3 days I didn't see a deer, but on day 4, driving around in the morning, glassing, found some deer. Ended up getting into a really good area. Joel ended up killing a buck there, and we saw a couple other slammers. You know, I didn't close the deal, but keep moving. That's You don't want to spread yourself so thin. It's like it's hard to find that balance between keep moving and sit on a piece. And the reason we kept moving is because we just weren't seeing the sign. But when we started glassing those deer, when we got into those pieces, man, the sign was red hot. You know, you had fresh tracks, big rubs. There was good feed in the area. So I just wanted to go back to that, what you said, keep moving, because I think that's super important. But I want to finish that thought up with keep moving, but stop when you find them.
Right. It's a gut instinct thing. It's a gut instinct thing that if you haven't done it many times, it's going to be tough to know. The way I look at it is there have been far more success stories by guys that just kept grinding until they found what they wanted versus, well, I'm sure glad we stuck it out here. You know, it's like, I knew we'd finally get lucky. When it's like, I even looking for hot sign around here, I like to keep on looking until I find something that I can't imagine walking past. I've had that happen in South Dakota where it's just like, oh, that looks like a pretty good spot, and you drive by, oh, look, there's 8 does and fawns over there and a little buck over there. Okay, and if you keep going, you might find, the honey hole. You just never know what's over that next ridge. But if you sit there and sit still, well, chances are you know what you're going to find. Of course, it's deer hunting. You always have a chance. But, I find way more success by just keeping going until you found exactly what you're looking for. Don't compromise, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I like to describe the really premium spots that I've hunted like a big buck. You know, a big buck shooter, no doubt when you see it, like, oh my God. And I feel the same way about when you get into an area that's going to be or is a great hunting area. It's like you said, you can't imagine walking past it. And for people that are kind of new to scouting or new to hunting out of state, you'll know these areas when you see them. And one more Kansas story, right? So this is the first time I went to Kansas, 2016. I was actually on some private land that we got on through a buddy, and these farmers had a few different pieces of land. And the one they hadn't hunted at all. So I was like, well, let's go check it out. Let's go scout it. So we went out there, the 3 of us, in the morning and just kind of walked the piece and saw the biggest track I had ever seen. Saw 3, probably the biggest, tallest 8-inch tree shredded chainsaw looking rubs. The area was screaming big buck. So I hunted there that night, didn't see anything. Hunted there the next morning in a really brutal story and a freezing morning, right when I climbed down the tree. I made it about 50 yards from my tree and looked back, and there's a 160-inch buck, right? So you'll know these areas when you see them, and the opposite end of the spectrum, if you're not seeing sign, if you're not seeing big tracks, you're not seeing hot sign, keep moving.
And a big thing as far as learning is if you really analyze what you're doing and where you're at, right? It's like there's more to it than, well, we've checked 5 properties and we haven't found anything good yet. Okay, what kind of properties did you look at? Was there cows in all of them? Were you by water? Is it hot out? Did they lack water? Like, what are you doing wrong? It's kind of like you're trying to figure out, there's so many questions. It's like this algorithm that you're missing this one major part of. What part of this puzzle are we missing? Right. So it's more than just, well, we just need to keep checking properties. You can put a little more effort into your thought process than that.
Yeah, for sure. And the last thing that I heard you mention and I wanted to come back to, I think this is huge too. Have fun / have a good attitude. It's easy, especially on your first time out of state, if you're not having success or you're not seeing deer, to question like, hey, what am I missing out on back home, and spots that I know like the back of my hand. Or it's easy to get down after a couple days and think, what am I doing here? I spent all this money. But talk about maybe how you keep a good attitude, and maybe if you've got a story where later on in the hunt after a grind you had some success.
I have a good story for that. It's not an out of state story, but yeah, it's tough. It does get to be a grind when you're out west and you're in new stuff. And for one, my biggest piece of advice is get out of the truck. The locals in South Dakota, drive, 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 go crest a few hills, walk a couple miles, you'll find deer. Yeah, it can get to be a grind. I mean, we've had times where you walk, like a 4 or 5 mile loop and you don't see a deer. Well, after you do that for a couple days, yeah, I mean, it's only natural that morale is going to be pretty low, especially after my 2016 buck, the story that I'm going to tell. I mean, we've all heard it a million times, but all it takes is one. It's like, and you really have to think positive in the aspect of like, I'm out here, I'm on vacation, I'm deer hunting. The success is all the sweeter, with a little struggle in there. So it's like without the bad times, the good times aren't as good either. And you're healthy. You've got 2 legs to get you where you want to go. How many people are maybe sick in the hospital, or they had their, a family illness and they had to cancel their trip. No matter how bad you think you have it, it could always be worse. So find something positive and just stick to it. And sometimes if you need a mental break, sleep in. If you're getting mad and it's like you're over it, have a couple cocktails, sleep in until 9. It's not something that you're going to want to do often. But if you need a mental break, take a mental break. But to tell the story real quick, I feel like I'm fairly windy, but my 2016 buck is a deer from Minnesota that I knew about him for 3 years, chased him for 2, and I was severely limited by the land that I had access to. 2 small private parcels in the same section, but totaled probably 30, 40 acres tops. And out of the 2 parcels. Well, to make a long story short, I unsuccessfully hunted him 1 year. Never saw him during shooting light, but he was all over my cameras. I shot a buck the night before, and then he just blew up my cameras. And I was like, you gotta be freaking kidding me. Like a couple times a week in daylight, I was like, next year, this guy is dead. Like, he is all over here. He is dead. Well, he'd showed up a few times at night, but never in the daytime. It was totally different year. And it got to the point where it was second week in a shotgun. I was feeling sorry for myself. It was pretty pathetic, honestly. I was texting a few friends. Like, I remember texting Tyler and saying like, oh, I'd just give like $50 or $100 to know exactly where he is right now. And he's like, oh, I know it gets to be such a grind and this and that. You obsess over a certain buck. And next thing you know, I look up and he's standing there chewing like a cow chewing cud, just standing there, his eyes half open at like 75 yards away, scraping on the only shrub that's out there. I couldn't believe it. And I shot him, and that taught me so much. Like, I went from like I say, I really was feeling sorry for myself, and for no reason, just because I couldn't find the deer that I wanted to shoot, and in the blink of an eye, like, I got super lucky that he didn't see me, because I remember picking my head up fast, and I looked up and there he was, and I was like, oh my God, it's him. And then yeah, so it's like, you can never ever say die. I was supposed to have that deer dead in archery season, then I got permission to gun hunt the other grove, and I'm like, he was all over on camera, this is going to be easy. Never got to gun hunt here before. He's dead. Nothing. I wasn't even seeing 2-year-old bucks. Just, my season sucked, and then just like that, best season of my life.
Yeah, man, it is cliche, but you're right. Every minute counts, and as long as you got daylight left, you're still in the game, and it can happen at any time. So it's hard to stay focused. It's hard to keep the morale up. But like you said, you could be in such worse scenarios, and you got to feel fortunate to be able to get out there. And I've hunted with some guys that have had some attitude problems, I'd say. And when you think about it, you plan this trip for months in advance, and you love deer hunting, and you get a week all year. So get out there and get after it every single day. And even if you don't really believe it, you got to really believe it, because that's how it happens, and that confidence leads into staying after it. I think for sure.
I'm reminded of Magic Man on the forum talking about not caring if he kills one. It's a little easier to not care when you got a bunch of bucks under your belt like he does. But you understand what I'm saying? It's like it's a different mindset. If you're like, hey, I'm just out here hunting, having fun. If I kill one, awesome. If I don't, so what? I'm going to do everything I can, and then that'll be that. It's like, but if you put all this pressure on yourself, I used to do that really bad. And I'd be burned out like by the time hunting got good. It'd be like, I don't know how many bucks I killed like October. Well, my birthday is October 29th. Like 3 of them I've killed on my birthday that were like just big enough where it's just like, man, if you would just hold on for a little bit more instead of this pity party and frustration shooting something, that's what big enough. Whack. Hey, I got one. Yeah, I'm awesome. No, it's just like, you gotta, and I think it's a lot of experience too. It's like you have to pass some of those bucks and then shoot a bigger one later. It gets a lot easier once you do get to that point, or you don't shoot one at all and you eat your tag, but then you shoot a nice one the next year. It's like, hey, I guess I didn't die. I bought some food at the grocery store and I made it another year. Is it really that big of a deal? It's deer hunting. Nobody's going to remember when you're dead that in 2020 you went deerless and you had to buy beef that year.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to know and nobody's going to care.
Not going to make the history books. That's actually a great segue, though. We'll get into the last couple of questions here and start wrapping this up. Looking back, what do you think were some of your biggest mistakes you made early on? And make this, if you can, like a 2-part answer. So kind of pre-hunting beast and post-hunting beast, because I think anybody that's been on the Hunting Beast forum and has adopted the bed hunting style tactics, definitely a learning curve in its own there. But you got a learning curve when you start deer hunting too. So if you could kind of talk about both of those, and maybe from like, totally green up to Hunting Beast, and then totally green Hunting Beast up to now. What were some of the mistakes that you made?
Okay, totally green pre-beast, overhunting the heck out of my stands, just like so many people still do, thinking that intrusion checking cameras didn't matter. I haven't checked that for 2 weeks. Yeah, I don't view it the same anymore. And another big one was I used to be a season-long rut funnel hunter. All year, look at that, anything that comes through here. Look at this slew edge pushes up against the standing corn. I can cover anything that comes through here. It's like, this is money. And then I'd sit there and nothing. Sit there and a doe comes by. Well, sooner or later, yeah, we've talked about it on the Beast a million times. I think it was Singing Bridge that said, I think it's in one of those greatest threads in that sticky thread. But you can be sitting in the most beautiful funnel in the world, but it is worthless if they don't have a reason to go through it. Sit there and say, why would a deer walk through here? And it's just like, when I read that, and I'm like, I am an idiot. How did that not click? It's just like, it makes so much sense. It's like, oh my God. So that was definitely the mistakes I made. I sat rut funnels constantly because I'd have success during the rut. So I'd go out and scout and like, oh, look at this funnel. Oh, look at that funnel. And I'd see deer and get strung along, like Dan says. And then when rut would come, then I'd finally have some success. I knew if I kept at it, I'd get one. It's like, you know what I mean? So that's how that was.
Again, probably a lot of heads nodding out there right now.
Oh, dude, I will never forget the feeling. I think it was in Dan's Marsh Bucks video when he said the reason why most people don't have success, early and late in the season is because they're using rut tactics all year long. I literally snapped forward on the couch like, oh my God, that's me. And I was like focused. Yeah, I was like focused on like everything he said after that. I'm like, holy crap, I am like totally reinventing myself. And then this kind of like leads into the second part of what you're talking about, being a green beast. I was like, I'm gonna shoot a monster. Like I've been doing good. I was in a Wired to Hunt article, Average Joe's kill big bucks with Ridge Runner 7, Andy May. I had that, and then I had an article posted as a guest writer, and I was like feeling pretty good about myself, So now I got these secret tactics. I got this on lock, man. Like, where's the booners at, right? And I ate my tag. That first year was the first, as a beast, was the first year that I ever didn't shoot a deer in my life since I was 12 years old.
Humbling.
I was like, okay, then I have some learning to do. Yeah, that like lit the fire under my rear end like nothing. And I had the time back then. I had a job where we were slow in the spring, so I had a ton. The one year I had 27 kill trees and ground blinds prepped like perfect, and like all this ground scouted. And so that was what laid the foundation down for like my tactics and my skill set now. It's like I got a ton of scouting in early, and it takes a ton of boot work. Don't think like any of you out there listening to this, if you think, oh, I walked 20 miles this year. Okay, that's 20 miles. It's really not that much. If you ask me, it takes a ton of scouting, 50 miles, 100 miles. I think the most I got the one year was like 80. And then I think the other two were more right around 50. But, and that's like GPS through the swamps, hard walking.
I don't have as much experience in Montana yet, so I don't know if this ratio holds, but in Michigan, I would tell people 5-to-1. I would walk 5 miles for every kill tree that I set up. And I think that's probably similar in your area, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, pretty close, something like that. I think so. And I mean, I'm around here, a huge parcel is 1,000 acres. That's like monstrous. So, I mean, there's a lot of couple 100-acre pieces. So I bounced in and out of a lot of stuff. Don't settle for the mediocre stuff. Keep walking, like I say, until you find stuff that it's like, oh, this is the goods. And if you're not sure what it is, put the time in, learn it, figure it out, and go from there. It's like there's been a lot of talk, and you'll probably agree with this, but it's like a 3 to 5 year kind of learning curve. It depends on your situation, how much time you put into it. But if you apply yourself, after like 3 to 5 years, you'll start to really get a good grasp on it. And I think that's pretty fitting.
I don't care what techniques you use. Deer hunting, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And the guys that are getting it done, those top tier, consistent killer guys, you talked about putting in the miles. I don't know a single really successful deer hunter that doesn't have hours and hours and miles in the woods. Not one. There's no shortcut to that kind of success. I mean, you might get lucky and shoot a good one every 5 or 10 years without that kind of work, but if you're after good deer every year, there's no way around it.
It's like you have to be a student of the woods. And one thing, this is slightly off topic from what we were talking about, but you have to be in season is crucial. You have to. The problem with spring scouting, oh, look at this bedding area. It's full of rubs. Okay, when were they made? September? November? When? You don't know. So when you go by and say you're hunting elsewhere, and then in the fall you get by it and it's early November and there's a bunch of rubs in there. Okay, were they made last week? Were they made in September? You still don't know. You really, on your best spots, you really got to keep tabs on it. Check for tracks. Check the fringes of it. You don't want to go tromping bedding and blowing them out of there and stuff. But it once in a while you can, if you feel like you're going to learn. I know one thing that I've done in the past is if it's an iffy spot that I'm not sure about, I'll throw a sit at it. And I've actually went into bedding areas early season with a flashlight before to see what's in there for rubs and beds.
What do you mean with the flashlight? Like, are you going in prior to the hunt, after the hunt?
After the hunt. So it's an evening hunt. I sit there. Like the one time I didn't see nothing. Sat there, no deer. It's like, I lost confidence in this. I don't think I'm going to hunt this again this year. So I went straight in there, got my phone out, went back to the buck beds. Nothing there. I think there was one tree that was like barely marked up. Beds didn't look very good. I'm like, okay. But in that same spot that spring, I went in there on a really windy day and 3 bucks ran out of there. But from what I saw. So that made me feel like it was a late season spot where, because that was in like March, right? I remember there was a little bit of snow, but maybe that's where they go. Pressure's almost non-existent. Okay, it's a little lackadaisical now. There's food nearby. We'll lay right in there. It's a classic terrain feature, but there's nothing there when I was there. But that doesn't mean there'll be nothing in there next year. That's all part of the game. You got to stay on top of it, keep reading sign, and figure it out. You got to let the deer tell you what to do. Because if you try, okay. Going back to your question of like when I was green, I tried to plan everything out. Okay, I'm going to hit this spot early season, and this spot should be good during pre-rut, and this is going to be like the peak rut funnel. No, do you show up on a lake and try and predict where the fish are? No, you use your locator and you go find the dang fish, and then you fish. I mean, I followed Dan for years before that really hit home.
I'm laughing, but I went through the exact same process where the first year or two, I think in my mind I decided, oh, this is when they're going to be there, instead of letting the sign, whether it's observations, tracks, rut sign, whatever it was, let me know that now's the time to hunt it. And that's a really important lesson, I think, when you're bed hunting.
A good example was, I think it was the first year me and Tyler went back into this bedding area, really remote. It's actually the same property I shot my buck at last year, probably a half a mile from where I shot my buck, deeper in there. And we're like, oh, this peninsula, like I don't care if you're a super green beast, you see this peninsula and island and you're like, that is money. I can't wait to go look at that, and they're, oh, there's buck sign, blah, blah, blah. So like it's opening weekend and we're going in there, and we got back there and there was hardly even deer trails. We saw one fawn, and I was like, well, what the heck? This was supposed to be like Booner Town, this was,
It's all a lie.
And now this past season, I shot that buck literally a half a mile closer to food. He was bedded 250 yards from my truck. I looped around and made my move. For the past, and I know that there was deer in there because there was rubs there and poop, and the sign looked basically the same the past couple springs when I scouted it and just assessed it wrong. And so I think for the past how many years, I've been heading back into that cover. The bucks are right by my truck.
Yeah, walking right by them.
Dude, I would head straight ahead. Like if I park and walk 250 yards in a straight line, they're right there on the right side. But I would take a hard left and go east rather than south. And then I would walk close to a half a mile to this sign and then just get strung along by a few does and little bucks and wonder where the big ones are at. Wherever the people aren't, period. Dan says it a million times. Wherever the people aren't, I don't care if you think it's stupid. If you don't ever go there, chances are, you get people that do all kinds of things, but just don't ever think anything is too stupid to hunt. If you think something's stupid, go bust it out. I do that a lot. I got a bedding area. I don't really know what to think of it. I'll cyber scout it or spring scout it and think, I'm really in between it. I'll walk through it in the middle of the season, see what runs out.
Man, that's a great point, and that's something that I've done more and more, like the more I've got in the beast, because if you're a hardcore deer hunter or even a semi-serious deer hunter, I mean, you got to be thinking long term, right? So if I bust these deer out, maybe I blew them up for this week or this month or whatever. But if you get that intel, there's a good chance with, out major changes like logging or total losses of food source, that intel is going to be good for the next 5, 10, 20 years. And that's, I think, a super critical point. Get that intel. I think a lot of people are scared to get in there in season and blow it up.
People are extremely scared to bust deer or get busted. Get over it. Go kick up some deer until you don't even care that you're kicking up deer anymore. Get over it and go, if you get busted, you're trying out a ground hunt and you get busted, just laugh about it. It's not a big deal. It doesn't matter. That's how you learn. You got to get out of your comfort zone and grow. Going back to busting stuff out in season, I don't think I have ever, not even once, came to the conclusion that it was a good spot and worthy of my time. I'm not saying that there's not huntable deer in there at some point,
right?
But I never was like, oh, I kicked a nice buck out of there. Oh, look at all this buck sign. There was bucks in here already. Not once. So it's like, that's how you learn. You got to answer the questions in your mind. Doesn't matter what the question is, find a way to answer it. Whether it's going against what Dan teaches or whatever. I mean, there's a few things that Dan teaches that I don't necessarily agree with. There's also things that he said in the beginning that I didn't agree with that now I do. So you got to make your own recipe for success. You can't read your way to success, and you can't go on the beast and start threads and then get all the answers. It's all about what your situation is and how you interpret sign and what your strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah, I don't know what podcast it was, but it was a fairly recent podcast with Joe Predator TC. His last name's Rentmeester. It's escaping me for a minute there, but he pretty much talked about the same thing about, like, early on in the beast, you read stuff and that's the rule book, right? And you don't deviate from the rule book, but that's not the case. Every situation's different. And I like to say there's no always and never in deer hunting. There's definitely tendencies and things that are consistent, but there's no always and there's no never. You got to make it work for whatever situation you're in.
Well, and just look at the different opinions. Look at all when we were doing those Q&As and stuff. Like no two people were the same. You got guys that say, I live and die by my cameras. They're a huge part of what I do. And the next guy's like, oh, I have some cameras, but I haven't put them out in a few years.
Right.
It's like, so, okay, that doesn't mean one guy's right and one's wrong. You got one guy, Dave T down south, he loves mornings. Other guys, oh, they're horrible. I always get busted, or they're always there before me. Well, can you kill one in the morning? Go figure it out. If you try it for a few years and it doesn't work, well then okay, now you know. Just don't sit there and wonder about it forever. It's not going to get you anywhere if you don't answer your questions.
Yeah, and you said that doesn't mean one guy's right and one guy's wrong. There's a good chance both guys are right, and there's something to learn from each one of them, and take the pieces that work in your area and integrate them, and the things that don't, you get rid of them. So want to move on here. Two more questions. We're going to wrap it up. So the second to last question I have is, do you set goals for yourself, like coming into a hunting season? And if so, what kind of criteria are you considering when you're setting your goals?
I mean, I do. My goal every year, the past few anyways, past 4 years or so, is a 3.5-year-old or better on public, which, I mean, in my opinion, if you get a 2.5-year-old on public around here, you're doing just fine with your bow. I mean, they're around, but like I say, I fight that low pressure, and I fight the pattern ability of these deer, because they really seem to be mostly here today, gone tomorrow, but that's not always the case. I found that last year. Yeah, I try not to get too caught up with goals. It's just I want to shoot a nice, respectable buck and have fun doing it. And I mean, I'm getting to the point now where it's like I've killed quite a few deer, and it's becoming like the need to kill is becoming less and less every year. So I enjoy my time out there more because of that. Because like I say, I had to kill my deer. I remember the first time that I didn't. It was December 31st. I froze my butt off. I'm like, this is a bunch of BS. I had to eat my tag. Now what am I going to eat in my fish house? I don't have any venison. This is a bunch of crap, And it's like, it doesn't really matter. It's all in your head. If you let it get to you, then maybe that's something you should work on. But it's just a deer, And I had people tell me that years ago. It's just a deer, man. Don't get so worked up about it. But and like I say, it's easy for somebody who's shot quite a few deer to tell that to somebody who's only got a few and is still really hungry. But put forth the effort. Your time will come. You'll get there. Stay on the beast and keep reading. Yeah, goals are good to have, though. I think it helps a person grow.
Yeah, that's going to lead into my next question. So I talked to you the other day and found out you got a golden ticket you'd been waiting on. So talk to me about your plans for 2020. I mean, you kind of discussed what you're after in Minnesota, 3.5-year-old with a bow, but tell everybody where you're heading this fall and what your plans and your goals are for out there.
I'll be heading to western South Dakota. I haven't had a rifle tag for out there since 2012. And I was applying for a really, really tough draw. A few years I just bow hunted and got points, but I had 6 points, and I finally decided to get out of that tough draw and go somewhere a little more within reach, I guess, as far as the application process goes. So I drew my tag, but it's going to be a little bit interesting. Depending on the weather, I might even be camping out by myself, getting one of those, I forget what they call them, one of them one-man sleeping bags that everybody packs in. They're not the great big ones that like mom and pop
like a bivy sack.
Yeah. So I might be doing that because where I need to go and where I need to be from what we've seen bow hunting is like, it's 2.9 miles to my lookout. And then it's another at least a mile through the nasty, nasty stuff. And I really don't want to leave my truck at 2 a.m. to beat everybody out there. So I might just sleep and see how it goes. But we've seen some monster muleys out there. So that's what I have, an any deer tag. And the rest of my normal crew, I haven't hunted with them for a long time because I've been bow hunting, but they've all got whitetail tags for the same zone. But you kind of find anybody that hunts South Dakota, the river bottom type stuff kind of hold more whitetails, watery, marshy type stuff, and then the rougher, rockier stuff is where you'll find the mule deers, and that's kind of where I'll be. So I might be
going
by
after
myself.
a muley then, huh?
I'm going after a big one, and if I'm going to be 4 or 5 miles in there, it ain't going to be small if I'm bringing it out. I'm faced with that battle of, this is a tag that I might not ever have again, because I don't know if it would take me, I don't know. If I want to keep going with my group, they like to draw and go a lot. So I don't know if I'll ever get enough points to draw an any deer tag again. So I might not have it again. So, okay, do I really want to eat this tag? I'm going to go out there and enjoy myself for sure. But it's like, I'm looking for like a big one, like a 170-ish is my goal. They're there. Or if it's an old warrior, we've seen a couple that were just, the one had to have been upper 20s wide and his tines were only like 12 inches or something, but he was just incredible, like Cabela's mass, just a beast, dude. And
horse body,
dude. We were actually tracking a buck. I've told you the story about that buck that I hit in the shoulder blade after the best stock that I will ever pull off. So we were tracking that deer, and while we were watching him down below, we looked over, and Tyler's like, "Dude, right there!" I'm like, holy crap! And I'm looking at the bottom, and I'm looking at the top, not realizing a buck could be laying on that. It was seriously close to vertical, and he was laying right in the center. And it's like, I'm talking 40 feet up and down. And that thing, he's seen us. If I would have had a rifle, I could have shot him easy. He was like 75, 80 yards or something. And he took off and he went straight up it.
Yeah, it's crazy where you find the muleys sometimes. They get in some pretty rugged country.
It was insane. But that thing was just a beast. So I don't know. I just want a nice mature buck. And like I say, I ain't shooting no 2-year-old, pack them out 4.5 miles. I'm going to be half dead. I'm not in good mountain shape like you and Tim.
Oh, that's Tim. I'm in terrible mountain shape. I just try to hang and not die.
So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But I got some work to do. I haven't shot my rifle in a while. Got to see how many even hand loads I've got. But I shoot a 25-06, then reload bullets. But it's been a long time since I reloaded any.
Hey, it'll be here before you know it. You better get on top of that stuff.
Dude, I know it. I got to apply for my Montana point too. Tim's going to text me every day, he said, until I do.
Get them while they're hot.
I'm slow on the trigger for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I can understand why. There's no good hunting out here anyway, so you probably shouldn't even buy one.
Well, you said it's really crowded too, so.
Yeah, people everywhere, no deer.
I know.
Terrible. Well, hey, I wish you the best of luck in South Dakota. I'm sure we'll be keeping up during the season. Want to thank you for your time coming on here, being the first guest.
No, man, it was a lot of fun. It was an honor, man. I appreciate you having me on here, and hopefully I didn't ramble too much, and hopefully your listeners learned a thing or two about topics we talked about, I guess.
A lot of good insights, and I think it'll be valuable information for people that are like us, like how we were a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, getting into the beast tactics and trying to bridge that gap from totally new guy to Dan. I think we're somewhere in the middle right now, and it's easier to take the first step than one giant step. So hopefully there'll be some good information for people looking to do some of their first out of the state hunts or refine their early life beast tactics.
Another thing I'll add about the new guys following the beast, there's a couple guys on there that make it look incredibly easy. Just Tell them congratulations and don't feel like crap about yourself, because we've been drooling over their bucks for years and they're just really, really good at what they do. Bow Hunter for Life, Ridge Runner 7. Those two guys really stand out to me.
Joe Elsinger, bunch of killers. So, hey, man, thanks again. And we're going to wrap it up there. And if you got any last words, say them now.
Oh, I think we're good.
All right. Hey, thanks again, Ryan. We'll catch you later.
All right, later.